got books. They're right here. So you brought props and books and
brought a gift for Aseem.
What is your?
We're going right for the T-shirts. Okay, T-shirt.
We told
reveal.
everyone to wear solids.
Yes, we did. But so the T-shirt says "Feel lucky," little Dirty Harry reference. But you won't see that there's 2 dots. And my plea as a professor at a university in Detroit, I talked to the guys about male health and erectile function. I've asked 10,000 guys, how's it go in bedroom? Or, if they're lucky, other than bedroom. Fun places like airplanes. That's the size of the human coronary artery, 3 millimeters. He's put many stents in coronary arteries. I've put many stents in coronary arteries. That's all it is. That's the size of the human penis artery, right there. It's 1 millimeter big. And when I talk to my guys very, seriously about it, I mean, I'm there to protect that artery from clogging, because your lifestyle goes down dramatically when that gets clogged up. So we're talking about such small arterial. I am fascinated by the human body as Aseem is. I mean, I'm fascinated by cardiac physiology. But that's the kind of small circulatory differences that we are going to discuss. What's in my field, in our field, the optimal way to protect and keep them clean. So, buddy, that's what you got to go. You're a big guy. You're a big guy. I mean, I'll give you that one.
Answer.
Well, that's all right. Hi, children.
Before we jump into this,
Mommy, what's a penile artery?
Aseem has a fabulous new film out. Let's roll the clip of the film real quick before we get started. The Big Fat Fix.
The scientific evidence is very clear.
I think one of the key things of the Mediterranean diet is the variety of food.
That adopting a lifestyle that involves a high-fat Mediterranean diet.
We use extra virgin olive oil.
What nuts contain are fatty acids.
And another interesting thing is the oily fish.
Even the dessert has been cooked in olive oil.
Mobility is hugely important. Going to work is like going to war.
Movement really does heal.
Movement, stress reduction, and stopping smoking is more powerful than any drug in preventing heart disease, treating heart disease, and improving one's physical state, emotional state, mental state, and longevity.
Awesome. You look very impressive with the log there, Aseem. So talk to me. So why the film?
Jason, I think one of the reasons we're all here is that, on a serious note, we actually have now a complete healthcare system failure, rooted in a number of factors. And that includes biased funding of research, so that's research that's funded because it's likely to be profitable, not beneficial for patients, biased reporting in medical journals, biased reporting in the media, and commercial conflicts of interest. And it's now quite clear, looking at the bigger picture, that the third most common cause of death after heart disease and cancer is prescribed medications. In the United States, a third of healthcare activity brings no benefit to the patient. And we're talking about healthcare spending in this country, which is close to $3 trillion. And the reality is the future of healthcare is going to be through lifestyle. Now, why have we got such an increasing burden of chronic disease that's affecting healthcare systems in the UK, where I'm from, in the US? And a lot of that is driven by diet. In fact, the Lancet Global Burden of Disease reports now tells us that poor diet contributes to more disease and death than physical inactivity, smoking, and alcohol combined. I've been on a campaign and a mission for the last few years. Like Joel, I trained as an interventional cardiologist. And I saw over my 15-year career that more and more people, more and more sick people coming in, more misery, more unhappiness, more chronic disease. Our hospitals had become branding opportunities for the junk food industry. I'm operating on someone in the middle of the night with a heart attack, and the next morning when I'm trying to tell him about a good, healthy lifestyle, he's being served a burger and fries. It's a scandal. And when I started on that mission to try and improve our understanding around nutrition and health, etc., one of the things I looked at was the research around the low-fat movement. And coming back to your question, to answer it more specifically, I made a documentary film with my co-producer, Donal O'Neill, who's a former Northern Irish international athlete, and we wanted to go to the roots of the Mediterranean diet. So one of the most powerful and influential men in the history of nutrition is a chap called Ansel Keys, an American scientist. And he did most of his research from a tiny Italian village called Pioppi in southern Italy. Now, this village has a population of around 200 people. And their average life expectancy still is around 90. A lot of people live over the age of 100. So we went back to this village to see how are these people living, what were the secrets there, how do we apply that to modern scientific literature. And what we found actually was very interesting is that there are many commonalities, which I'm sure Joel will agree with, but the amount of sugar they were consuming was very low. Sense of community was really important. And how do we look at the modern scientific literature in terms of other dietary components that are going to reduce the risk of heart disease? David's already very eloquently talked about the role of inflammation in the body. And coronary artery disease is an inflammatory disease. It's not a disease caused by dietary fat.
Yep.
And certainly there is a lot of debate going on at the moment, and I'm sure we'll talk about that with Joel shortly, around saturated fat and whether that causes heart disease. So that's kind of where things have started for me. And the film is really to look at the root causes of the increasing burden of chronic disease is really being driven by excess sugar in the population and potentially vegetable oils as well, industrial vegetable oils.
So let's go back to, let's set the stage. You guys have a lot in common. You're both interventional cardiologists. You both believe that heart disease is, preventable through lifestyle, 80% of it at least. There you go. You both don't believe in sugar. You both believe in exercise. But where you start to depart is, talking about Ansel Keys. You've both been to the village, but you have different opinions on what the takeaway is. And you shared your takeaway. Joel, what is your takeaway?
Yeah, very coincidentally, I was in POP and Acciaroli where Aseem totally I didn't know over the movie. So we were there, I don't know how many months apart. It's a beautiful place to visit. Although I choose to eat a vegan diet. That's personal reasons. You can embrace that or not. I teach my patients the data of Nathan Pritikin, Dean Ornish, Neil Barnard, Caldwell Esselstyn. I can go back to Walter Kempner, what's called the Rice Diet at Duke, peer-reviewed, published data that coronary artery disease melts away with a low-fat, plant-based diet. That's for the very sick and the very few, but it is uncontested. In fact, there's only 2 diets that our government reimburses a patient for to reverse heart disease. The Pritikin diet, which is a no added oil, vegetable-based diet. They do allow 3 meals a week that have animal products. And the Ornish diet, which is the same but allows none. Our government has evaluated all of the programs and has found those are the only diets. I'm obligated as a cardiologist to teach patients with coronary disease. This is science, this is an option, and I've chosen myself to live that way. I have a restaurant that cooks that way, but I don't choose to put that in anybody's lap unless you have severe coronary disease. You need to know forks over knives exists. The other option, in my mind, is the original Mediterranean diet, which is POP, which is Nicotera, which is Crete, which can be a very high oil diet. It's just not a high saturated fat, animal-driven oil diet. Crete is 40% calories from fat, almost all olive oil, very low saturated fat content, and they have almost no coronary artery disease. Ansel Keys recognized that. He chose Crete as one of his test subjects. His diet books, I don't know if people know, Ansel Keys wrote 3 diet books that became bestsellers. They are unbelievably rich in olive oil diets, 1959, 1972, and 1975. He, in fact, I have them right here, he banished sugar from his recipes in 1959. Now, a lot gets confused. Plant-based diets are naturally low sugar, and depending on your orientation, can be naturally low in fat. Mediterranean diet, if done as prescribed, is naturally low in sugar. I mean, we agree on that, but in your documentary, you push the bread away. Cereal, pasta, and bread is the foundation of the Mediterranean diet, as every dietary trial that studied the Mediterranean diet, Predimed included. You have to bring the bread bowl back, because that is the foundation. I know that's unpopular, but that is, you have to do a new study if you're going to make the Mediterranean diet a low-carb, high-fat diet, and those studies have been done.
So let's start. So you both, I both heard the phrase plant-based. So you both agree on that. Where you start
plant-strong, plant-predominant,
plant-based, plant-strong, but starting with lots of great, healthy, fresh, green vegetables, we agree on that. Where you start to differ is fat.
I accept a pretty darn high-fat diet for the general public as a reasonable, a la the Mediterranean diet. 40% calories, 30% calories.
So that's olive oil.
That's going to be olive oil, and I know you're going to love me for saying this. Organic canola oil in the Leon Heart Study reduced recurrent myocardial infarction heart attacks by 75%. I know it's the least popular position to take, but another study showed that endothelial artery function improved with canola oil. It's crazy data. I wouldn't buy it except
you've
organic.
Got your oils, you got coconut
vegetable
oil,
oils, right?
Avocados.
Well, so just I'll be time efficient. Since Aseem published a very widely read editorial in the British Medical Journal in 2013, Harvard School of Public Health has been slamming this topic of you have to look at, if you're going to give up saturated fat, what are you replacing with? And we all agree, if you replace it with simple carbs, white sugar, Snackwell cookies, graham crackers, you're doomed. It's a horrible thing to do. It actually doesn't make you worse than eating saturated fat, it's just no advantage. If you replace saturated fat with whole grains, according to Lee last year, Harvard School of Public Health, 130,000 people, you drop your risk of dying. Now, if you're smarter than that and you replace saturated fat with vegetable oils, not coconut oil, because there's no coconut oil in the Mediterranean basin. There is no extra virgin coconut oil in the Mediterranean diet. You are now creating a new model. But if you do replace saturated fat like butter, lard, and such with vegetable oils, your risk of having a heart attack goes down 25%. That's my job, to reduce heart attack rates. I embrace that data.
That's
And
his job. That's his
published
job
in
too.
the last 6 weeks by Harvard School of Public Health, Walter Willett.
Let's
and
talk about
others.
Harvard School of Public Health. Only a few days ago, the New York Times published a piece. I remember at the beginning I talked about bias funding of research. Harvard scientists were paid by the sugar industry to shift blame to fat. So the question is, how do you cut through a lot of the bull, to be honest?
1965.
Yeah, so I agree with Joel. You know, when we talk about the base of the food pyramid, the problem with the refined carbohydrates and the breads and the pastas in excess, and actually in Pioppi, a lot of Italians, I've got a lot of Italian friends, I've been to Italy a lot of times. Actually, we have taken what was small amounts of pasta as an antipasti, like a starter, and turned it into main course. So it's all about, the amount. But, this brings us on to something else, and this is irrefutable. Type 2 diabetes is a disease of carbohydrate intolerance. Now, when you look at the three macronutrients, fat, protein, and carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates in particular, that is what has the biggest response on glucose and insulin. And these are the types of foods that are going to make you more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. Not only that, and I want to come back to insulin resistance in a second, because that's really important. There's actually been quite a lot of data, and there's a general practitioner in the UK who has actually started advising his type 2 diabetes patients to cut out the refined carbs and the sugar. And that means the bread, the white bread, it means pasta, it means cutting out the rice, reducing potatoes. And it's quite extraordinary that within months, patients are coming off their medications for type 2 diabetes. I saw a patient only a few weeks ago who was a lady in her early 60s. She'd been type 2 diabetic for 25 years. For the last 17 years, she had been on insulin up to 80 units a day. She came to see me to get an assessment about her heart, etc. And she had actually managed to come off within 3 months all her insulin. And I said, how did you manage that? And she says, smiling, she says, I cut out the rice, the bread, and the sugar, and now I'm eating butter and cheese again. Her cholesterol profile was perfect. And this has been actually quite scandalous because we actually can reverse type 2 diabetes and certainly at the very least reduce the need for medication. So coming back to what Joel has said, yes, it did feature, of course, bread, etc. Pasta is in there, but it's much smaller amounts. The modern wheat that we have now is very different to the kind of wheat they were consuming in the times of Ansel Keys. And what should be at the base of the food pyramid should be lots of vegetables, ideally non-starchy, okay?
So 2 thumbs up on that.
Absolutely. Olive oil, definitely.
Okay, 2 thumbs up.
Nuts, there are lots of good studies on nuts and the anti-inflammatory properties of nuts, and I want to come on to that as well in a minute about inflammation. And oily fish. And Joel talks about all these different studies. And Joel talks about different studies, but it's about the quality of the research. Now, Cambridge Medical Research Council did a very big study published in Annals of Internal Medicine looking at all of the data from observational studies, randomized controlled trials, over 600,000 participants. And what they concluded was, what was very interesting is that saturated fat, and listen, I'm not here to say people should be gorging on butter or having a bath and bathing themselves in butter. This can be part of a healthy diet, okay? This can be part of a healthy diet as long as you're getting the base, the rest of it right. You cut out the refined carbs and the sugar. You have the vegetables, the olive oil, the nuts, the oily fish, if you like. You can have some meat as well. And actually, to be honest, David's already talked about fat is medicine. It's actually very satiating, and it has the least impact on insulin responses. Now, let's talk about insulin resistance very quickly. What's the number one risk factor for heart attacks in men? It's not cholesterol, it's insulin resistance. It's more important than high blood pressure, more important than high body mass index, more important than low HDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol, which is where all of this has come from, the saturated fat causing increase in LDL, driving heart disease, actually has a much smaller effect. And not only that, I published some research only a few months ago in BMJ Open, and what we found was if you're over 60, LDL cholesterol was not associated with cardiovascular disease, so this is so-called bad cholesterol, and was inversely associated with all-cause mortality. Partly because cholesterol is one of the most vital molecules in the body. In fact, it's involved in the immune system and probably protects against infection. So we've got everything kind of upside down. Now, why is it most people don't know this? Because we've got a huge industry around low-fat foods to lower cholesterol, even though other than statins, there's not been any single trial that shows that lowering cholesterol from reducing saturated fat has actually improved cardiovascular outcomes in terms of randomized data. And the whole insulin resistance issue, the reason most people don't know that is because the solutions are relatively simple. They're through lifestyle mechanisms. They're through diet, movement and exercise, stress reduction, sleep, and this is where the solutions lie. So the future of healthcare is going to come through lifestyle. And, I hate to say it, but good health, and I'm sure a lot of you will agree with this, rarely comes out of a medicine bottle.
So is insulin resistance, in your opinion, the biggest marker for heart disease?
Absolutely. And it's also linked to many other, it's a precursor to type 2 diabetes. 40% of the American population now pre-diabetic. We know that it's linked to Alzheimer's disease. David's talked about that already. Yep. So, this is where the focus should be. And, there's never been one of the other issues around insulin resistance is we've never really produced any effective drug that's been able to target insulin resistance.
So that's why.
One of the reasons we don't know about it so much. But, the good news is lifestyle changes, and, I've got no issue with people being vegetarian or vegan. If you're getting your nutritional requirements and you're otherwise leading a healthy lifestyle, that's not, I don't think there's any major issue. My mum's a vegetarian. I mean, I probably get about 3 WhatsApp messages to her from a week talking about plant-based diets and how good it is for you. And I grew up actually on a vegetarian diet, and I'm actually slightly biased towards the fact that I think Indian food has the most variety for vegetarian food, and I love it. But, let's look at the science properly in totality. Let's look for the commonalities. And, of course, more research needs to be done. But in terms of the data that exists at the moment, certainly a higher fat diet than one that exists, and Joel agrees with that. Now, where does saturated fat come in? Well, actually, there are many different types of saturated fatty acids. And there is some data suggesting certainly that we've looked at butter specifically. Darius Mozaffarian from Tufts has done a very good research looking at butter. And I would say that eating butter from a cardiovascular point of view, I wouldn't say it's good for you. I would say it's neutral, sort of at worst. Could be related to reduction in risk of type 2 diabetes. But again, it's about looking at the whole overall diet and not demonizing one particular food.
No hero in demon foods. Although hero, I think you'd all agree, plant-based vegetables. Can't go
Absolutely.
We do disagree. There has been a randomized study of a plant-based, no-added oil diet that got to the level of size and mortality reduction that the government now reimburses for it. It's called the work of Dr. Dean Ornish. Then he proceeded to look at prostate cancer, and he showed that a low-fat, plant-based diet shrinks prostate cancer, lowers PSA, and actually lengthens telomeres, which we talked about last year as a marker of longevity. In the Predimed Mediterranean study with 40% fat calories, telomeres did not lengthen. With a low-fat, no-added oil Ornish diet, telomeres lengthen. Whether that means people on that diet are going to live longer is unknown, but it's an area of current follow-up. I'm concerned, and we'll differ, cheese in the Predimed study increased insulin resistance. It increased metabolic syndrome occurrence. You recommend cheese in the diet? I will not recommend cheese because the Predimed Mediterranean diet says that's a food type that increases your risk of metabolic syndrome, which I don't favor in my patients. So I agree, parsing the data is difficult, but a low-carb, high-fat diet increases coronary artery risk and death. I mean, that's incontrovertible data.
Well, actually, I disagree on that. So critical review in nutrition, critical review in nutrition actually showed that apart from fasting or starvation, if you like, for type 2 diabetes, low carbohydrate diet actually had the most beneficial effects, not just in reducing the need for medications or improving glucose markers in the blood for people with type 2 diabetes, but also reversing all markers of the metabolic syndrome. Now, let's talk about Dean Ornish. And I have a lot of respect for what Dean Ornish has done. I think he's done some great work. The study that Joel's referring to, small numbers, but certainly looked at very good outcomes in people, who are at risk of heart disease or had heart disease, and it was multiple factors. Now, yeah, of course, low fat was part of it, but it was also about reduction in stress, it was exercise, it was all these other aspects to it, smoking reduction. I mean, smoking, the biggest decline in cardiovascular death in the last several decades has happened because of a decline in smoking. There was a place in Helena, Montana in 2002. They brought in a public smoking ban. Within 6 months, just to give you an idea, because this links to diet, within 6 months of the smoking ban, there was a 40% decrease in hospital admissions for heart attacks. 40%. When the tobacco lobby weighed in, the law was rescinded. The admission levels went back to preceding levels. And how do you explain that biologically? Well, just 30 minutes of secondhand smoke increases what we call platelet reactivity, so it basically makes the blood more clottable. And the comparisons between tobacco and big sugar are quite chilling. It took 50 years between the first links between smoking and lung cancer were published in the British Medical Journal before any effective regulation happened. And that's because big tobacco played dirty. They had a corporate playbook which basically included denying that cigarettes cause cancer, planting doubt, confusing the public, and even buying the loyalty of scientists. And we're now learning the same thing has been happening with sugar. So, I think Dean Ornish did some very great work. Can you tease out specifically it was low fat? I don't think you can. I don't think and if you want to look at this data or critique of that work in the best possible way, it's not here to criticize Dean Ornish, then I suggest you look at Nina Teichholz, who's done a very good analysis and critique of Dean Ornish's interpretation, certainly, of Dean Ornish's work.
So for all the people out there, who are listening, what we don't want is people to become more confused.
Absolutely.
So, if we're going to take the best of both worlds,
right,
and also the knock on diet is sometimes it's not accessible. So if we're going to take the best of both worlds, what does that look like? So you all agree plant-based diet, fats, you agree to some degree.
I think we both agree on olive oil.
Fats.
Olive oil, you agree?
Healthy diet can be plant-based fats.
Butter, you disagree on. We both agree we're not going to bathe in it.
Well, the unsaid, and it's always has to be mentioned, it's 1,500 gallons of water to make a pound of meat. It's 1,000 gallons of water to make a pound of cheese. We're in Arizona, many of you are from California.
Yep.
The environmental impact of your food choices is the single biggest decision you can make for a green earth or a barren earth. And only plant-strong diets and plant-based diets are going to make that impact. And let's stop raping and killing animals for our lust. I mean, I live in a life that is enriched by knowing I don't harm animals. My boots are vegan.
Sure.
So I want to bring that up as the always unsaid in the paleo low-carb movement, and it's huge.
I think everyone understands that here.
Yeah. Well, we need to live that if we understand that, at least in my life. I can't talk to other people.
Yeah, and I'm not going to stand here and say you have to have meat to reduce your cardiovascular risk, and you don't need to. The question is, how is that data and interpretation of the evidence on the science around meat consumption, how is it being used by people who have fundamental beliefs, and I respect those beliefs about harm to animals and not eating meat. There's no issue with that. As I said, my mum's a vegetarian and feels very, very much the same way. But let's just get the science right. The commonalities, coming back to what you said, Jason, I think, the olive oil, the vegetables.
Eat more fruits and vegetables.
And cut out the refined carbs and sugar. And certainly if you're at risk of type 2 diabetes,
stop
that's
eating
really
donuts,
important.
start eating apples. We'll change the health in England and
Absolutely.
America right away.
Yeah.
I mean,
There you go. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. There you go.
I brought you a gift, though.
Oh.